artificial intelligence is rapidly moving from a productivity tool to a decision-making force inside corporations, raising profound questions for boards about oversight, accountability, and the future role of human judgment. As companies deploy AI in increasingly consequential areas, directors must grapple not only with today's risks around bias and governance, but also with longer term questions about how AI could reshape the very foundations of corporate decision making. In our final segment, with Sy Lorne, director of Teledyne Technologies, we'll explore what effective board oversight of AI should look like now and what directors should be preparing for next. So, Sy, boards are being told that advanced AI systems can reduce human bias, but many directors worry that bias is simply being hidden inside code and data. From a governance standpoint, what should boards today be asking management about how AI systems are trained, tested, and audited so that bias risk is real oversight, not just a compliance checkbox?
Good question, and like a lot of these questions, particularly in this area, depends on the company to some extent. I mean, if I'm a director of Alphabet and Google's AI is outward looking, if you will, and whatever biases may be in there, we've been reading in the paper the last couple of days about the AI interface with customers and how it may lead customers to avoid mental health experts when they should get them, et cetera, with sort of disastrous consequences, allegedly in a couple of lawsuits. That's one set of questions. That I don't think that's what you're really focused on. More, I think we care about the internal utilization of AI. But again, a lot of it depends on the nature of the business we're talking about and the way in which AI is being utilized. For example, I read an article yesterday or maybe this morning about the use of AI in internal audit. And it was discussing the ways in which, with AI, internal auditors, instead of using a sampling methodology, can look at everything. I don't think there are very many questions about bias that come out of that utilization of AI. On the other hand, if there are biases that adversely affect the results you're getting from AI, you do want to know about it. And it's certainly true in the abstract that artificial intelligence can eliminate the normal cognitive biases that we've all come to use and to some extent try to avoid interfering with judgments we make. But inevitably, it's true that the programmers who create the AI may well be importing their own biases into it. And beyond that, it's the nature of artificial intelligence, at least as we see it in 2026, that we're still operating with large language models that are taking an inquiry and looking at vast amounts of data and taking the response step by step from that starting point. And the data they're trained on, the vast amounts of data the model looks at when it takes the next step, is going to have its own implicit cognitive biases. And if your database was the New York Times, you may get one set of responses about President Trump. And if it was the Wall Street Journal, you might get a different set of responses. And so there's a risk of sort of groupthink, if you will. If all of the data that the model looks at is created in the last, let's say, 3 or 4 years before the last presidential election, it would have thought of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, as a very important part of the decision-making process, and less important from a purely pragmatic perspective. I don't want to get into the ethical A's and B's of it all, but from a purely pragmatic perspective, you're not worried about getting in trouble with the Department of Justice for ignoring DEI today. You might worry about getting in trouble for paying too much attention to it. And if the data set you're working from has incorporated DEI elements into its analysis, you'd want to know that. And it's very hard to figure out what biases may have been imported. Now, from a director's perspective, you've got the age-old question of micromanagement and how much we get into it. If we're sitting in the boardroom and the head of the AI group is talking to us, we should be interested in how she is constructing the models. I'm assuming it's an internally constructed AI model. How she is constructing the models to avoid biases that you don't want, and what areas things might creep in, and you want to make sure she's doing that. We don't want, not very many directors are capable. I'm not capable of digging into it and figuring out where the bias is taking us. So I don't need to worry about being called upon to do that, because I'm not capable of doing that. And on the boards on which I sit, I don't think right now anybody is. And I don't think you need to have somebody who is in the weeds of AI any more than you need somebody in the weeds of cybersecurity or any of the other hot topics. If somebody has a capacity that's useful on a board, but I don't think you need to have a cybersecurity director or an artificial intelligence director. So all of those factors go into it. And it's good to remember two things. It's good to remember a lot of things, but two of them are, one, that we tend to hear the word bias, and we've been trained to say that's a bad thing. I was looking the other day at an old copy of a book by Robert Cialdini called Influence, which, if you think about it, he's a psychologist, I think still at Arizona State University, and he talks about the way in which a sales operation can use cognitive bias in a positive way. Anchoring. We tend to be influenced by the first price we see. And so real estate agents tell them if you tell them you have a $600,000 budget, they take you first to a $700,000 house that is overpriced, so that when they show you something at $500,000, you think it's really cheap. If they showed you a $200,000 house first, you'd think the $500,000 is really expensive. So for a sales-based organization, there are a lot of ways in which cognitive bias is a useful attribute, and you want it to be used. So you need to be a little bit careful, I think we all do, when we talk about bias and thinking about where it's used and what it's used for, and making sure that there's a rational relationship between the utilization and the data set it's trained on, and the oversight of the construction of the model, etc. And I think that's a question of sitting down in the board meeting with the responsible officers of the corporation and asking them how they're covering those things, and what they're thinking about and figuring out whether and that's a sensible approach. That's all. Directors aren't called to be perfect, thank God. Uh, they're called to have a rational relationship between their duties and what they're doing. And you look at some companies, the ones that have been in the newspapers on the board level, and I think of the old Blue Bell ice cream problems and the Marchand case in Delaware. The cases that have gotten into serious litigation have been pretty extreme cases, and the courts have been pretty clear in saying that we're looking for a good faith effort to pay attention to the question. Is bias one of the questions that ought to be asked about? Absolutely. And should you pay serious attention to the answers? Absolutely. But you're not called to be perfect in your response. You're called to make a good faith judgment based on what you're hearing.
When you look at some of these other areas that AI has made its way into, we're already seeing AI influence hiring, capital allocation, compliance decisions. For boards right now, where should the line be drawn between machine recommendation and human judgment? And what governance guardrails should directors insist on before AI systems are allowed to shape high stakes corporate decisions?
I think that's right, Bill. I think you need to be asking the questions about the level of reliance on the machine's answer. Uh, are you just turning it over and getting an answer and going with that, or are you giving it a check and thinking about it seriously? And I think most managements today are doing that. I'm not sure that'll be true 20 years from now, and that raises a whole set of different questions. Today, at least, I think managements are feeding the background material, if you will, into the AI model and getting responses and seeing if it makes sense, seeing if it's rational. And, there are still a number of senior managers out there who rely a lot on their gut instinct. And some of those gut instincts are pretty well trained. So you see the expert, here I'm calling AI the expert, you see the expert answer, and sometimes you say that's a nice answer, but that's just not right. And then you need to get a little bit deeper and check your instincts may be wrong. The machine may be right, but if your instincts are contrary to what the machine is telling you, then you need to dig in and think about it and come to a decision. And it may well be uh, a decision that is contrary to the machine.
Interesting. I wanted to talk about a concept that basically learned from you in the lead up to this discussion. So you're the perfect person to talk about it, right? Artificial general intelligence. So artificial general intelligence, to put the right accent on the right word. Looking ahead to a world of artificial general intelligence where machines may effectively optimize across every business domain, does that fundamentally change the logic of corporate ownership and capitalism itself? And if so, what should boards start thinking about now as stewards of companies that may soon be driven more by algorithms than they are people? It's a little bit scary to talk about it that way, but what do you think?
Yeah, no, I think that's a real question. And I was reading one of the books by the doomsayers, if you will, the title of which is If Anybody Builds It, Everyone Dies. And uh, that's a scary thought. And the authors build up a reasonable set of analysis
Yeah.
that gets you to the conclusion that that's entirely possible. It's back to 2001: A Space Odyssey, where at the end, Hal tells the machine to shut itself off, or I'm sorry, the pilot tells Hal,
That's
the
right.
machine,
Dave.
shut itself on, and I can't do that.
Yeah.
I'm taking this machine where I want it to go. Uh, Maybe we get there. That book at least says it may be in 5 months, it may be in 50 years, but we'll get there. So the
Yeah.
first thing boards can do is pray for 50 years to get prepared for that day. But when we get there, I don't know, there was a book several years ago uh, by Thomas Frank, a Wall Street Journal reporter, called "What's Wrong with Kansas?"
Yeah.
And his thesis was that uh, Kansas voters vote irrationally against their own economic interests.
Mm.
And I thought a point that the book missed was that one of the reasons people might vote against their economic interests today is that we're optimists. America is a very optimistic country.
Yeah.
And I might well be more interested, if I'm a voter in Kansas, in making sure I'll have opportunities 5 and 10 years from now than I am in maximizing a welfare payment today.
Yeah.
And I think we as a country, we feel very comfortable with Elon Musk and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos, and you can go down the list, being very rich, being irrationally rich compared to almost all of us. But we want those incentives to be there for people so that Elon Musk will focus on getting to Mars or having electric vehicles, or Jeff Bezos will focus on having Amazon deliver the best retail experience possible.
Yeah.
When those decisions start getting made by a machine, are we quite as comfortable with the person who happens to own the machine getting all the economic benefits?
Mm.
Does it really develop that way? I mean, or will we have machines competing with them? I don't know what that world looks like. It's kind of scary to think about. I mean, we've had much too much already movement in this country toward accepting socialism,
Mm.
I think, and a lot of people agree with me, and especially with the younger crowd. And if the perception is that the machines are making all of the decisions, then socialism starts to sound a lot more rational as an approach. If we're being governed by these machines, and I hope and pray it won't be 50 years, it'll be 500 years, and it's
Let's
not at
hope
all
so.
clear it'll ever happen. But should we get to that stage, I don't know what the political reaction will be to it. And
Yeah.
I worry about that for my grandchildren. I don't think it, I don't think it's going to bother me at my stage in life, but my grandchildren, I worry about it. And how that will all evolve is so hard to predict at this stage, but we need to be aware of it, and we, we tend to have a very short-term political structure in America.
Yeah.
Presidents get elected for 4-year terms, congressmen get elected for 2-year terms, and people tend to worry about what happens during their term sometimes and don't spend enough time focusing on what happens after their term. And we've seen that for the last 20 years with concerns about the expense of Social Security and Medicare. Uh, I don't know that we have the foresight, the will to really focus on how this might evolve and how to prepare ourselves in a sensible way for it. I worry about it.